Lucky Luciano, the man who made the Primal Mafia. This episode was originally created under criminal code. You're now watching Mob Truth, where silence dies and real mafia stories come alive. The streets of Hell's Kitchen. Lucky Luciano, the man who made the Primal Mafia. Before he became the architect of the American underworld, he was Salvatore Lucania, a scrappy Sicilian immigrant hustling on the brutal streets of New York. He didn't come from power. He didn't inherit anything. He took it. In the slums of Hell's Kitchen, Luciano learned fast that fists weren't enough. You needed strategy. You needed vision. You needed to think bigger than street corners and petty rackets. While other mobsters clung to old traditions, Luciano was planning something new, something modern. A mafia with structure, a commission, a future. But to build it, he'd first have to destroy the past and betray the very men who taught him the code. The Mafia betrayal, Luciano was rising fast, but standing in his way was Joe the Boss Mafia, the old-school Don of Dons, traditional, paranoid, and ruthless. Luciano had worked under him for years, running bootlegging operations and handling muscle work. But Lucky had grown tired of the old ways. The constant infighting, the blind loyalty, the rules that didn't make sense in modern America. And then came the war, the Castellamarese War, a bloody street conflict between Mafia and his rival, Salvatore Maranzano. Bodies dropped all over New York. It was chaos and Luciano was in the middle. But instead of choosing sides, he made his own plan. Play both ends. He pretended loyalty to Mafia while secretly negotiating with Maranzano, offering him a deal. You give me peace, and I'll give you Mafia. The betrayal was executed with cold precision. In April 1931, Luciano lured Mafia to a quiet lunch in a Coney Island restaurant. As they played cards, Luciano excused himself to the restroom. Moments later, gunmen stormed in, and Mafia was dead, shot multiple times in the head and chest. The old Don died holding a losing hand. That wasn't just a murder, it was a declaration of war against the old world. Luciano wasn't just a soldier anymore, he was now a kingmaker. The double cross and the birth of the commission. Maranzano kept his word. After Mafia's death, he declared victory and crowned himself Capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses. But Luciano immediately saw the problem. Maranzano was no different than the last guy, still old school, still ruling by fear, still blind to the idea of change. Lucky realized, if I want to build something that lasts, this guy has to go too. So he set up another betrayal. Just 5 months after Mafia's death, Luciano sent 4 Jewish hitmen, dressed as government agents, to Maranzano's office. They didn't talk. They stabbed him, shot him, and left him bleeding across his desk. With both old bosses gone, Luciano wasted no time. He gathered the leaders of the 5 families, along with major out-of-town figures like Al Capone, and unveiled his vision. No more boss of bosses. From now on, we vote. We sit down. We run this like a business. That was the birth of the Commission, a governing body that ruled over the mafia from coast to coast. Every family had a seat. Conflicts were settled through consensus. Murders had to be approved. Luciano turned organized crime into a corporation, and the world would never be the same again. Luciano's empire, from streets to skyscrapers. With the commission in place, Luciano went global. His reach stretched far beyond New York. Through alliances with Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Bugsy Siegel, and others, he ran gambling operations in Cuba, drugs through Sicily, and rackets in every major American city. Unions, ports, construction, politics. Luciano's influence ran deep. Even Hollywood knew his name. Running the mafia from prison. Prison might have held Luciano's body, but it never touched his mind. Even locked up, Lucky still ran the commission. He passed orders through trusted messengers, gave approval for hits, and made sure the money kept flowing. From his cell, Luciano remained feared and respected. The bosses still bowed to him in silence, knowing that his word carried more weight than the warden's. He kept in contact with Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and other top figures. Business never stopped, it just got quieter. And while other mobsters faded behind bars, Luciano only became more mythical. But outside, the world was changing, and war was coming. The Mafia's deal with America. In 1942, World War II turned New York Harbor into a potential battleground. Fears of German submarines and sabotage ran wild, especially after the mysterious fire aboard the SS Normandy, a massive French liner docked in Manhattan. The U.S. Navy needed eyes on the docks, and they knew exactly who could deliver. Lucky Luciano. Through intermediaries, the government struck a deal. Luciano would mobilize the Mafia to protect the ports and stop any sabotage in exchange for one thing: freedom. They called it Operation Underworld, a secret alliance between the U.S. government and organized crime. It was the kind of move only Lucky could pull off: turn prison into a bargaining chip and the American war effort into his golden ticket. The release and the fall. In 1946, Luciano's sentence was commuted. He walked out of prison, not a free man, but a man with a deal. He would never return to his empire. He was deported to Italy, shipped back to Naples with the clothes on his back and the weight of the world behind him. But even in exile, Lucky stayed connected. He made quiet trips to Cuba, met with Lansky, checked on the Vegas operations, made sure his legacy stayed alive. But his empire was no longer his. Others had moved in, the streets had changed, and Lucky Luciano was now a legend, watching from the shadows. Easing, Sinatra, and the final game. In the late 1940s, Luciano reappeared, this time in Havana, Cuba. He was trying to reestablish himself, to rebuild what was lost. He threw lavish parties, met with old friends, even crossed paths with Frank Sinatra, who allegedly visited him at a hotel while Lucky plotted his comeback. But it wasn't to last. The U.S. government found out, and under pressure, Cuban authorities deported him again, this time for good. Luciano returned to Italy, aging, isolated, and out of the game. Still rich, still feared, but no longer in control. Surveillance, isolation, and a changing world. Through the 1950s and into the 60s, Luciano lived quietly in Naples, always under watch. American agents tracked his every move. Italian police raided his apartment. Newspapers printed rumors, and tourists whispered when they saw him in the street. He was no longer the boss. He was a relic, a myth, a man who once ruled America's darkest empire, now sipping espresso under surveillance. But Luciano didn't complain. He once told a journalist, "I did what I had to do. I made my own world. I played the cards I was dealt, and I won." Until his final hand. The Ghost King of the Commission. Even exiled in Italy, Lucky Luciano never truly stepped away from the throne. Through Meyer Lansky, Vito Genovese, and other trusted figures, Luciano stayed in contact with the American families. His advice was still followed. His name still carried weight. Phone calls, coded letters, and quiet meetings in hotel lobbies. Luciano was like a ghost king, not seen, but always felt. He never attended commission meetings again, but his shadow sat at the table, the Las Vegas blueprint. Vegas was never Luciano's idea, but it became part of his legacy. It was Bugsy Siegel who had the vision, but it was Meyer Lansky who handled the numbers. And behind both of them, Luciano's approval. The Flamingo Hotel was the first step. Glitz, gambling, and golden silence. The mob saw that they could build a city in the desert, one built on bets, fear, and loyalty. Even in exile, Lucky gave the nod, and the world watched a mobster dream turn into a billion-dollar playground. Luciano wasn't always loved. After his deportation, some bosses whispered that he'd made too many deals with the government, that he'd broken omerta, the code of silence. Vito Genovese, once his underling, began rising fast, claiming Luciano was out of touch, too soft, too far removed. The betrayal stung. Genovese tried to reshape the Mafia in his image, but he lacked what Lucky had: respect, vision, and control. Luciano wasn't scared of rivals. He just knew when to step back and let history clean house. And it did. The last chess move. In 1962, Luciano met secretly with Hollywood producers. They wanted to tell his story, the truth, the whole truth. For the first time, Lucky considered letting the world in. It wasn't about ego. It was about control. He knew others were already twisting his legend. Journalists, cops, enemies, even the commission. This was his chance to set the record straight, to show how it really happened, from Hell's Kitchen to Havana. But fate had other plans. Death in silence. The meeting ended. The car was waiting. Luciano lit a cigarette and fell. Heart attack, instantly. No final words, no goodbye, no camera rolling. He died with secrets still locked behind his eyes, and the streets never forgot. Newspapers around the world covered it. Mobsters in suits flew to Queens. 2,000 people attended his funeral, but only a few really knew the truth. The blueprint that still breathes. To this day, the commission still exists, in new forms, new faces, but the same structure Lucky designed. The five-family system, the vote before hit rule, the rackets, the loyalty, the fear, all of it came from one man's vision. Luciano turned the Mafia from a blood feud into a global system. He didn't just build an empire, he wrote the blueprint for every boss who followed. And though he's buried in the ground, his code still rules the streets. The man behind the mask. To the public, Lucky Luciano was a myth. Clean suits, hard stares, and whispered power. But behind the image was a man who never stopped calculating. He studied every move like chess. He knew which friends would betray him. He knew which politicians to buy, which judges to threaten, and which cops to quietly support. He wasn't just a gangster, he was a tactician. Luciano once said, "There's no such thing as good money or bad money. There's just money." That mindset built an empire. But it also kept him isolated, respected, feared, but always alone. Love, regret, and loyalty. Luciano never married. Some say he didn't trust anyone. Others say he couldn't risk weakness. But he did fall for a ballerina, Igea, an Italian dancer he met in Naples. They lived together quietly, and she stayed loyal until her death in 1959. Lucky once told a friend, "She was the only thing in my life that wasn't business." After she passed, Luciano didn't seek love again. All that remained was power and ghosts. The U.S. kept watching. Even in exile, FBI agents kept files on Luciano, monitoring his calls, tracking who visited him, and suspecting he was still pulling strings in America. They never had proof, but they didn't need it. To them, Lucky would always be the godfather of organized crime. Even the CIA kept loose tabs, wondering if he still had contacts in Cuba or Sicily that could interfere with U.S. interests. He wasn't just a man, he was an ongoing threat. The fall of Genovese. Luciano's biggest enemy in his later years wasn't the law, it was Vito Genovese. Genovese had tried to seize control of the commission after Luciano's exile. He forced alliances, pushed fear, and made enemies. But Luciano was patient. He worked quietly with Lansky and Costello and helped orchestrate Genovese's downfall. Genovese was arrested on drug charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison in 1959. He died inside, bitter and broken. Luciano's final revenge was delivered without a bullet, just silence. From legend to lesson, modern mobsters still study Luciano's rise. His photos hang in backrooms. His name is spoken with a strange kind of respect. Not because he was perfect, but because he built something no one else could. He proved that fear wasn't enough. You needed structure. You needed diplomacy. You needed brains behind the violence. Lucky Luciano gave the Mafia something it never had before: longevity. Ghost of a kingpin. Sometimes in Naples, they say you could still hear his voice in old cafes. The man in the tailored coat ordering espresso. The man who spoke softly but everyone listened. The man who never bragged, because he didn't need to. Lucky Luciano died without ceremony, but his empire, his rules, his code, still walk the streets today. The politicians he played, Luciano never ran for office. He didn't need to. He had mayors, district attorneys, and even senators in his pocket. They didn't call it bribery, they called it business. In New York during Prohibition, politicians would look the other way as Luciano's trucks delivered bootleg liquor under city lights. When the police got too close, he'd move cash in envelopes. If that didn't work, he moved fear. Luciano didn't fear politics. He understood it better than most politicians. ECC, the mob code he rewrote. Before Luciano, the Mafia was ruled by ancient codes from Sicily, blood oaths, family ties, superstition. Lucky changed all that. He made one rule matter most: money before everything. Ethnicity didn't matter, age didn't matter, bloodlines didn't matter. If you were smart, loyal, and could deliver, you earned a seat. He respected old values, but not enough to die for them. He turned the Mafia into a modern system, a business, not a brotherhood. His enemies weren't just mobsters. Luciano had rivals in the underworld, but also in law enforcement, journalism, and Wall Street. Some feared what he exposed. That power could be bought. That government wasn't clean. That the criminal world sometimes ran smoother than the legal one. They tried to erase him from history books, but his influence was too strong. He became a quiet warning. Control the narrative, or someone like Lucky will. The women who knew the truth. Luciano rarely showed affection, but he surrounded himself with dancers, singers, actresses, women who moved between light and shadow. Some loved him, some feared him, some tried to expose him, but none ever truly brought him down. In private, he was quiet, polite, even romantic, but always watching, always thinking. He once said to a dancer in Rome, "I don't fall in love, I fall into silence. That's where I feel safe." The letters he left behind. After his death, authorities found letters Luciano had written but never sent. Some were addressed to Lansky, others to government officials. One simply read, "They built cases, I built families. They made speeches, I made structure. History will choose." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't regret. It was strategy, even in death. The funeral. The streets remembered. When Luciano's body was returned to New York, over 2,000 people came. Old friends, mobsters, curious onlookers, and silent enemies. He was buried in St. John's Cemetery, the same ground that holds bosses, killers, and made men. But none had his reach. None had his reputation. And as the priest spoke his final words, one mobster whispered to another, "There goes the man who built the playbook." This story was originally produced under the name Criminal Code, but now you're watching something new. This is Mob Truth, where silence dies, and real mafia stories come alive. Lucky Luciano didn't just build a mafia, he built a legacy. From betrayal to brotherhood, from prison cells to war deals, his name rewrote the rules of crime in America. And that name, still whispered, still studied, still feared. If you want more true stories like this, hit that subscribe button and join Mob Truth, new episodes dropping weekly. And let us know in the comments, who should we expose next?